He had always lived a quiet life inside the walls of the Vatican, moving gently through hallways filled with soft footsteps, whispered prayers, and the sound of bells ringing in the distance. Pope Leo XIV was known for his calm spirit, his warm smile, and the way he listened more than he spoke. People often described him as someone who carried peace around him like a quiet light. Even though he held one of the most respected positions in the world, he never acted like a man above others. He preferred simple conversations and humble gestures. And he believed deeply that every person, no matter their status, had something valuable to offer. Outside those stone walls, the world was loud and full of excitement. And one of the brightest stars in that world was a famous pianist. This man had performed in grand concert halls across continents, filling theaters with thunderous applause. Critics called him a genius. Fans followed him everywhere he went. Cameras flashed whenever he stepped on stage. His fingers flew across the keys like a storm, and every note he played came with a dramatic flair that people couldn't forget. But along with his talent came a reputation. He was confident, sometimes too confident. Many said he carried pride the way others carried their coats, always visible, always close. He loved attention, loved praise, and he believed that only true artists understood the world. That belief made him dismissive of people he thought lived outside the world of art. When the Vatican first reached out to invite him to a private musical evening, he was surprised. He had performed for presidents, royalty, and wealthy art patrons, but a personal invitation from the Vatican felt different. At first, he laughed and shrugged, thinking it was a formality. But as the news sank in, excitement sparked in him. Performing in such a historic place would add another triumph to his already glittering career. He imagined newspapers talking about the event, fans praising him online, and maybe even a documentary capturing his grand entrance into the heart of the Catholic world. The thought fed his ego, and soon he was thrilled to go. Preparations began inside the Vatican days before his arrival. Staff polished the grand hall where the performance would take place. Fresh flowers were placed along the aisles. Gentle lights were arranged to give the room a warm, welcoming glow. The hall was not meant to be flashy or dramatic. Instead, it reflected the calm beauty of the Vatican's traditions. Guests were carefully selected religious leaders, scholars, and a few visitors who had dedicated their lives to service. It was meant to be a quiet evening of music and reflection, not a loud celebration. Pope Leo XIV approved everything with a nod and a soft word. He insisted that the pianist be treated with kindness and dignity, just like any other guest out. As the day approached, people whispered about the event with curiosity. They wondered how the famous pianist would behave in such a spiritual place. Some admired his talent and looked forward to hearing him play. Others whispered that his pride might clash with the Vatican's humble atmosphere. But no one truly knew what to expect. In the center of it all, Pope Leo XIV remained calm. He did not worry about fame or ego. He believed music could touch the soul, no matter who played it. And he hoped the evening would bring peace to everyone who attended. The pianist arrived in a sleek black car, stepping out with confident posture and a practiced smile. Photographers snapped pictures, even though the event was meant to be private. He waved as if standing on a red carpet, ignoring the quiet tone of the place. When a Vatican aide approached to greet him, he barely offered eye contact. His mind was already on himself, how he would look, how he would sound, how the audience would react. Inside the hall, guests began to take their seats. The pianist walked through the grand corridors, letting his eyes sweep over the artwork and statues that lined the walls. He admired the craftsmanship, but in a distant way, as though he was touring a museum, not a sacred home filled with history and devotion. He whispered to his assistant that the place felt too quiet, too serious, and that he would bring some real excitement to the evening. His assistant nodded nervously, sensing that he might not fully understand the tone of the event. When the pianist was finally escorted into the performance hall, he looked around and noticed something that puzzled him. There was no special throne-like chair set apart from the others. There were no bright spotlights highlighting a single powerful figure. Instead, every seat looked simple, humble, and nearly identical. The guests chatted softly, waiting patiently. Near the center, sitting among everyone else, was Pope Leo XIV. He wore simple robes and a peaceful expression, blending in with the crowd rather than standing above it. The pianist glanced at him, but didn't recognize who he was. He assumed the Pope would be seated in some elevated place, surrounded by attention and formality. So to him, this quiet man sitting modestly among others must have been just another official. The pianist took his place at the grand piano, a beautiful instrument, polished to a mirror shine. He lifted his hands dramatically, enjoying the silence as the room waited for the first note. He loved that moment right before playing, the moment when everyone paid attention to him and only him. Then, with a confident flourish, he began. The music filled the hall, powerful and intense. His fingers raced, each movement sharp and precise. The audience watched with awe. Many had never heard such skill up close, and the room seemed to hold its breath in admiration. Even Pope Leo XIV leaned forward, his face softening with wonder. He appreciated beauty in all forms, and this music, though bold and commanding, stirred something deep inside him. But as the pianist played, his thoughts were not on connection or emotion. He thought about how impressive he must look, how honored everyone must feel to hear him. He imagined applause echoing through the hall, imagined stories being told about his greatness. He believed he was the star of the evening, the center of attention, the most important figure in the room. When the final note rang out, the audience applauded warmly. It was not a roaring, chaotic applause, but a respectful and heartfelt one. The pianist was accustomed to louder reactions, but he accepted it with a modest bow that felt more like a performance than a gesture of gratitude. He glanced at Pope Leo XIV again, still unaware of his identity, and noticed the gentle smile on the man's face. To the pianist, that smile seemed too simple, almost naive, and he turned away with a slight shrug. After the performance, guests were invited to mingle. Small tables offered refreshments, and conversations flowed quietly. Pope Leo XIV walked among the guests without fanfare, speaking kindly to each person. Meanwhile, the pianist stood confidently near the front, expecting people to approach him with praise. A few did, offering polite compliments, but many were more focused on the shared experience of the evening rather than glorifying him individually. The pianist felt slightly irritated. He whispered to his assistant that the crowd seemed too calm, too reserved, and that they didn't fully understand his genius. He laughed lightly, as if he were above them all. His assistant shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. A few moments later, an aide approached and invited the pianist to greet a small group of attendees. He agreed, assuming he was being taken to an elite circle of admirers. As he walked over, he noticed the same humble man he had seen earlier, Pope Leo XIV, standing among them. Still unaware of who he was, the pianist assumed he was just another church worker, perhaps someone assigned to oversee the event. The pianist offered a nod, then made a casual joke about how some leaders in traditional places probably didn't understand modern art. The comment was light, but it carried a tone of superiority, as if he believed people in religious settings were out of touch with real culture. A few listeners stiffened, recognizing the mistake. They knew exactly who the humble man was. But Pope Leo XIV did not react. He simply listened quietly, his eyes soft, his demeanor calm. The pianist continued speaking, enjoying the sound of his own voice. He talked about his international tours, his awards, his success, and how the world needed bold creators like him. He never once asked about the people he spoke to, never showed interest in their lives or feelings. To him, the moment was another stage, and he was the performer. As the evening continued, a quiet tension formed in the air, not loud or confrontational, but noticeable. Some guests exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to the pianist's arrogance. Others stepped back politely, giving space. Through it all, Pope Leo XIV remained gentle and composed, watching with thoughtful eyes. He did not correct the pianist. He did not reveal his position. He did not demand respect. Instead, he observed quietly, as if waiting for the right time to act. He believed deeply that true character was revealed not when a person stood before power, but when they believed they stood above others. And in that belief, a small seed was planted, an idea that would shape everything that happened next. The evening, calm on the surface, was already moving toward a moment no one could have imagined. A moment that would change the pianist, surprise the entire Vatican, and reveal something extraordinary about humility, dignity, and the quiet strength of a gentle heart. The evening moved into a quieter phase after the performance, but the famous pianist felt restless. He was used to loud applause, long lines of admirers, and people rushing up to shake his hand. Here, everything felt too calm, too polite, and too controlled. The Vatican guests smiled gently, spoke softly, and seemed more interested in the shared experience than in celebrating him alone. He didn't understand that kind of atmosphere. To him, a performance was a spotlight, and he believed he should be standing right in the center of it. He crossed the room slowly, carrying a confident air as he walked. His shoes echoed against the marble floor, and his coat flowed behind him like a cape. He kept lifting his chin slightly, hoping someone would notice his presence and rush over to praise him. A few people did greet him, but their words were short and modest. They thanked him for the music, complimented the emotion in the performance, and then moved on to talk with others. There was no dramatic admiration, no long speeches about his talent. He found it disappointing. Inside, a small frustration started building. He whispered to his assistant that the audience didn't appreciate greatness when they saw it. His assistant nodded awkwardly, unsure how to respond. The pianist was used to a world where fame ruled everything, where being celebrated felt normal. In this peaceful space, his pride felt out of place, like a loud sound in a quiet room. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV continued to move through the hall with the same gentle smile he always wore. He stopped to shake hands, listened to people with genuine interest, and shared soft words of encouragement. He made no effort to stand out. Most people would not have guessed that he was the central spiritual figure of the entire Vatican. He blended in, choosing closeness over distance, humility over grandeur. He stood among the people as if he were simply one of them. Eventually, an aide suggested that the pianist join a small conversation circle where the Pope was present. The pianist agreed, but not because he cared about meeting anyone in particular. He believed he was being led to a more important group, people who might praise him more openly or offer bigger opportunities. He walked with confidence, stepping into the circle with a practiced smile. He looked around briefly, noticing the same humble man he had seen earlier, the one sitting among everyone else during the performance. The pianist still didn't know he was looking at Pope Leo XIV. To him, the man seemed ordinary, almost invisible. There was no crown, no throne, no dramatic presence. Just a calm face and peaceful eyes. The group welcomed the pianist warmly. Someone thanked him for sharing his gift. Another person mentioned how music had brought a feeling of calm to the evening. But the pianist didn't focus on their words. He was too busy preparing his own comments. He liked speaking about himself, about his success, and about his view of the world. He believed his thoughts were superior because he was an artist, a man who shaped emotions and controlled audiences. Pride made him blind to the humility around him. Then, almost casually, he made a remark that changed the entire tone of the conversation. With a half-smile, he said that many traditional leaders, especially in places like this, didn't understand true art. He joked about how old institutions were stuck in the past, unable to appreciate modern talent. The words slipped out smoothly, almost like a stage line, delivered with confidence and a little bit of arrogance. The room fell quiet. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their eyes. Others glanced at the quiet man standing near the center of the group. The man the pianist still believed was just another staff member. Those who knew his true identity waited for a reaction. They wondered if the Pope would speak sharply, correct the pianist, or at the very least, reveal who he was. But Pope Leo XIV did none of those things. He simply stood there, listening with calm attention. His eyes held no anger, no irritation, only a soft understanding. He seemed to see deeper than the words themselves, as though he recognized that the pianist spoke from pride, not hatred. The moment felt tense, like a breath being held. The pianist, unaware of the weight of his comment, continued speaking. He talked about how in the world of art, only those who took risks became legends. He gestured with his hands dramatically, enjoying the attention. He said that true artists lived above ordinary rules, and that people who didn't understand that would never truly appreciate greatness. Again, silence followed. Someone gently tried to hint at the truth. One of the guests cleared their throat and said softly, "Do you know who you're speaking to?" The pianist blinked, confused. He glanced at the quiet man again, wondering if he had missed something important. But before he could say anything, Pope Leo XIV spoke for the first time in that conversation. His voice was calm, gentle, and warm. He thanked the pianist for his music, saying it brought beauty to the evening. He added that art had a powerful way of touching hearts, even in places rooted in tradition. He didn't correct the pianist. He didn't defend the Vatican. Instead, he spoke as though he was simply another admirer of music, grateful for the performance. The pianist was taken aback. He had expected an argument, or at least a defensive reply. Instead, the man's humility caught him off guard. It made the pianist feel strangely unsettled, though he couldn't explain why. He brushed off the feeling and changed the subject, still unaware of the truth. But the tension hadn't disappeared. People around them exchanged quiet looks, unsure how to move forward. They respected the Pope deeply, and hearing him spoken to so casually even mocked felt uncomfortable. Yet the Pope seemed calm, as though he carried no injury from the remark. As the pianist continued talking about himself, a subtle shift began to happen. The more he spoke, the more obvious his arrogance became. The more he bragged, the more distant the people around him felt. Instead of admiration, they began to feel pity. He seemed trapped in his own pride, unable to see beyond his ego. Finally, someone could no longer hold their concern. A guest stepped a little closer to the pianist and said in a gentle voice, "You may not realize this, but the man you're speaking to is Pope Leo XIV." The words hit the air like a sudden gust of wind. The pianist froze. His smile faded. His breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened as he slowly turned his head toward the quiet man, the one he had underestimated, the one he had joked about, the one he had treated like an unimportant figure. Pope Leo XIV stood there, still wearing the same calm expression. There was no anger in his face, no judgment, no superiority. He simply nodded softly, acknowledging the truth without flaunting it. The pianist felt his heart drop into his stomach. A wave of embarrassment washed over him, hot and heavy. His legs felt weak, and for the first time that night, he didn't know what to say. His confidence cracked. His pride shook. He realized he had not just made a thoughtless comment, had ridiculed the very leader of the Vatican, without even knowing it. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. His throat felt dry. He wanted to apologize, but the words stuck. His mind raced with panic. How could he have been so careless? How could he not recognize a man of such importance? He had assumed power must look flashy, commanding, and grand. He never imagined that the most respected figure in the room could be so humble, so quiet, so gentle. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV spoke again, still in his calm tone. He said there was no harm done, that everyone had different perspectives, and that art was a language of expression. He didn't scold the pianist. He didn't point out his arrogance. Instead, he offered grace and unexpected kindness in a moment that could have turned harsh. The pianist lowered his head, feeling the weight of his mistake. The room remained quiet, filled with a mix of shock and awe. No one had expected such humility from a man in such a high position. The pianist felt smaller than he ever had in his life, not because he had been punished, but because he had been forgiven. As the silence lingered, Pope Leo XIV gently stepped away, moving toward another group of guests, leaving the pianist standing alone, overwhelmed by shame and confusion. It was in that moment that the pianist realized something deeply unsettling. Power was not always loud. Pride was not strength, and true greatness didn't need applause. And though no one knew it yet, what would happen next, the Pope's next action, would stun not only the pianist, but the entire Vatican, and leave a mark on every person who witnessed it. The pianist could not believe what had just happened. The truth that he had ridiculed Pope Leo XIV without knowing it weighed heavily on him. His mind was spinning with embarrassment and confusion, and yet he also felt something new: curiosity. How could a man so powerful carry such humility? How could someone be so calm and unshaken by a careless insult? These thoughts rattled inside his head as he lingered near the edge of the hall, unsure of what to do next. Pope Leo XIV, meanwhile, continued to move through the room, his calm and gentle presence making everyone around him feel at ease. He spoke softly with guests, listening attentively, asking questions about their lives, their families, and their work. Every gesture was quiet, every smile sincere. The pianist watched from a distance, still trying to process the moment. He had always believed that people in power were meant to impress, to dominate, to be larger than life. Yet here was the Pope, a man with far more authority than he could imagine, and he didn't act like a ruler at all. He acted like a person who genuinely cared. The pianist's curiosity gradually grew stronger than his embarrassment. He wanted to understand this calmness, this gentle confidence, this inner strength that did not require display or recognition. He stepped closer, slowly, trying to make himself appear less awkward, though inside he felt anything but confident. He had spent his life being praised, being admired, being seen as brilliant. This was unfamiliar territory. He had never met someone whose character made him pause and question himself. As he approached, Pope Leo XIV noticed him immediately. There was no surprise or anger in his gaze, only warmth and attentiveness. He offered a slight nod, acknowledging the pianist without making him feel small or guilty. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a weight that was impossible to miss. The pianist felt a sudden pull to speak, to explain himself, yet the words tangled in his throat. Finally, the pianist managed to whisper an apology. His voice was low, hesitant, almost as if he feared the words would not be accepted. I did not realize who I was speaking to. Please forgive me, he said, his pride slipping away like sand through fingers. Pope Leo XIV smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand lightly on the pianist's shoulder. There is nothing to forgive, he said calmly. We all speak without knowing sometimes. What matters is what we learn afterward. His voice was soft, yet it carried authority without aggression. It was a lesson hidden in kindness, a lesson in humility that the pianist could feel deep in his chest. The pianist nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and awe. He had expected confrontation, maybe even scolding, but he received something far more powerful: understanding. The contrast struck him sharply. He realized that real strength was not loud or dramatic. Real power could be quiet, gentle, and still move people profoundly. He had always admired skill and talent, but here was a different kind of greatness, one that came from character. From the heart, not the applause of others. The Pope continued speaking, his words calm and measured. "Music is a gift," he said. "It speaks to the heart in ways words cannot. But it is also a teacher. It teaches patience, humility, and empathy. Even those who perform it brilliantly must remember these lessons." The pianist listened intently, feeling a mixture of guilt and inspiration. He had never been spoken to in this way. He had lived in a world where admiration was expected, where applause was the measure of worth. Yet here was a man who commanded respect not through spectacle, but through presence and understanding. It made the pianist reevaluate everything he had believed about himself and his art. For a moment, the room seemed to fade around him. The voices of other guests, the soft hum of conversations, the distant echo of footsteps, all of it disappeared as he focused on the calm, steady presence of Pope Leo XIV. It was as if time itself had slowed, allowing him to absorb something far more important than applause or fame. The Pope, sensing the pianist's inner turmoil, offered a gentle suggestion. "If you are willing, perhaps you could show me a little of your music, not for the audience, not for praise, but for sharing. Music is strongest when it connects hearts, not egos." His words were not a command, nor were they an invitation designed for grandeur. They were simple, sincere, and filled with quiet hope. The pianist blinked, surprised. He had not expected such an offer. The idea of playing for someone without the pressure of judgment, without the need to impress, felt strange and unfamiliar. His mind raced with doubt. Could he perform without ego? Could he let someone witness his skill without seeking admiration in return? And yet, something about the Pope's demeanor, the calmness, the humility, the genuine interest made him want to try. Slowly, he nodded. "Yes, I would like that," he said, almost hesitantly. He realized that this was not a performance for the world. It was something personal, something deeper. It was a chance to connect, to share, and perhaps to learn in return. An aide led them to a small, private room near the hall. The room was quiet, warm, and intimate, with soft light filtering through the windows. In the center stood a piano, polished and ready. The pianist approached it cautiously, as if stepping into unfamiliar territory. He opened the lid and let his fingers hover over the keys, feeling their smooth surface, hearing the faint echo of potential notes waiting to be played. Pope Leo XIV took a seat nearby, his posture relaxed and inviting. He did not demand the pianist perform perfectly. He did not sit in judgment. He simply watched with eyes that reflected curiosity, patience, and encouragement. It was a presence that made the pianist feel both nervous and inspired. He began to play a simple piece, something he often performed for practice, not for applause. At first, his fingers were tentative, uncertain, as though testing the waters. The notes were clear but cautious. Yet as he continued, he felt something shift inside him. The music was no longer about showing skill or seeking recognition. It was about sharing, about expressing, about connecting with the quiet presence of the man sitting nearby. Pope Leo XIV listened intently, nodding subtly to the rhythm, allowing the music to reach him fully. He did not interrupt, he did not correct, he simply let the pianist play. And in that quiet space, something remarkable happened. The pianist felt a sense of release, a freedom he had never known. The weight of ego, expectation, and pride began to lift. He realized that music could be pure, beautiful, and meaningful without needing to impress anyone. As the piece ended, the room was silent for a heartbeat. The pianist exhaled deeply, feeling both relief and wonder. He looked at Pope Leo XIV, unsure what expression he would find. Instead of critique or applause, he found a warm smile. "That was beautiful," the Pope said softly. "Not because of perfection, but because of honesty. Music is not only about skill. It is about heart, intention, and presence." The pianist nodded, overwhelmed. He had never received a compliment like this. It was not about fame or recognition. It was about truth. And in that moment, he felt a deep respect for the man sitting across from him, a respect that went far beyond authority or position. For the first time that evening, the pianist reflected on his own life. He realized how much of it had been spent chasing applause, chasing recognition, and seeking validation from others. He had played for crowds, critics, and cameras, but he had rarely played with sincerity, without ego, without a desire to impress. And now, sitting in that quiet room, he saw a different path, one where music and life itself could be guided by humility, empathy, and connection. The Pope, sensing the shift, spoke again. "True greatness is not measured by how many people see you perform or how loudly they applaud. It is measured by the impact you leave on hearts, by the kindness you show, and by the respect you give others. Talent is only one part of it. Character completes it." The pianist absorbed the words, feeling them settle in his mind like seeds planted for growth. He understood that this was a lesson he would carry forever. Humility, patience, and grace were as important as skill. And in a way he could not have anticipated, the Pope's calm response to his earlier arrogance had become a lesson stronger than any applause or critique. The rest of the evening unfolded differently for him. When they returned to the larger hall, the pianist noticed things he had never paid attention to before. The soft smiles of the guests, the gentle nods of respect, the quiet way the Pope interacted with everyone. He saw how small gestures of kindness could leave a lasting impression. He realized that influence did not always need grandeur. Presence, sincerity, and humility carried their own power. By the time the evening drew to a close, the pianist felt a transformation within himself. He had arrived expecting to impress, to perform, and to be celebrated. Instead, he had learned something far more important. He had discovered a different kind of greatness, one that did not seek attention, one that was quiet, patient, and enduring. And though he did not fully understand it yet, he knew that this encounter with Pope Leo XIV would change the way he approached music, life, and even himself. The lessons of humility, grace, and quiet strength had begun to take root. The evening had started as a performance for others, but it ended as a lesson for him, a lesson that would shape the choices he made, the way he treated others, and the music he played from that day forward. It was a night that began with pride and expectation, but ended with reflection, respect, and a deep sense of awe. And the story. The evening continued in its quiet, reflective rhythm, yet the pianist could not shake the feeling that something extraordinary had begun. He had expected applause, attention, and admiration, but what he had received instead was a lesson in humility. A lesson not given as a lecture, but shown through calmness, kindness, and the unshakable presence of Pope Leo XIV. That presence seemed to carry an invisible weight, not of authority or fear, but of wisdom and understanding. The pianist found himself thinking about it constantly, even as he tried to focus on the soft hum of conversation around him. Pope Leo XIV had a way of making everyone feel important, not by drawing attention to himself, but by listening and noticing details that others overlooked. He would pause in conversations to remember a guest's name, to ask about a recent event in their life, or to compliment them sincerely on something small yet meaningful. The pianist noticed this quietly, watching how people's faces brightened when the Pope spoke to them. It was a different kind of power, one that was subtle but deeply affecting. After a few moments, Pope Leo XIV turned toward the pianist, his gentle smile inviting him to follow. The pianist hesitated, unsure if he should respond. He had never been personally guided by anyone in such a manner. The usual world he lived in was full of cameras, flashy lights, and public praise. Private guidance, offered so simply, felt unfamiliar. Yet he was drawn to it. He nodded and followed quietly, almost nervously, through the hallways of the Vatican to a small, private chamber. The room was calm and uncluttered, bathed in soft light that made the polished wooden floors gleam. In the center stood a grand piano, its keys gleaming as if waiting for the pianist's hands to bring them to life. The room had a peaceful energy, different from the grandeur of the main hall, a space created for focus, reflection, and quiet practice. The pianist felt an unfamiliar mix of nerves and anticipation. This was not a performance for critics or fans. This was private, personal, and meaningful in a way he had rarely experienced. Pope Leo XIV gestured for him to sit at the piano. "Would you play for me?" he asked softly. Not for judgment, not for applause, but simply to share the music. The request was simple, yet it carried a depth the pianist could feel immediately. There was no expectation, no pressure, only the offer to connect through music. He sat down slowly, his fingers hovering over the keys. He began with a small, familiar piece, one he had practiced countless times. At first, his playing was cautious, his mind still tangled with the embarrassment of the evening's earlier moments. But he soon noticed the Pope watching him not as a critic, not as a judge, but as a listener. The eyes were calm, patient, and kind. The pianist felt a sense of ease he had not known in years. As he continued, something began to shift. The notes he played no longer carried the weight of ego. He played not to impress, not to display skill, but to express feeling. The music flowed with a sincerity that surprised him, notes stretching and bending in ways that felt natural, organic, and alive. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely immersed, not performing, but simply being with the music. Pope Leo XIV listened intently, his expression softening as the pianist played. He did not interrupt or comment, allowing the music to fill the room. His presence was calming, a steady reminder that the purpose of music was not to elevate oneself above others, but to connect, to share, and to express. The pianist felt his heart respond to this idea, a profound realization settling in that music was never about pride or status. It was about emotion and connection. After a few moments, Pope Leo XIV spoke again, his voice quiet but full of warmth. "You have great skill," he said, "but true mastery comes not only from technique, but from humility, from understanding, and from the ability to touch others without demanding recognition." The words were not a criticism. They were a gentle guiding truth, delivered with the patience of someone who understood that lessons are learned through experience, not forced. The pianist paused, letting the words sink in. He realized that this was more than a lesson in music, it was a lesson in life. He had spent years measuring himself by applause and accolades, believing that recognition was proof of worth. And yet, here was a man, a leader of the world, who carried more influence and respect through kindness and understanding than he ever had with fame. The comparison struck him deeply. Encouraged by the Pope's calm presence, the pianist continued to play. He experimented with soft melodies, hesitant at first, then growing in confidence as he allowed himself to be vulnerable. Each note seemed to carry a new meaning, a reflection of the lessons he was learning in that quiet room. And music became a dialogue, a conversation between him and the Pope, unspoken yet fully understood. Pope Leo XIV nodded occasionally, his eyes reflecting genuine appreciation. "Music has a power that is often misunderstood," he said after a while. "It can teach patience, empathy, and awareness. It can show us parts of ourselves we never realized existed. But to access that power, one must play with intention, not for praise, not for attention, but for connection." The pianist felt a warmth in his chest, a sensation that went beyond pride or ego. It was humility, and it felt strange, yet liberating. For years, he had measured success through external validation. And here he was learning that true fulfillment came from sincerity, from giving fully without expecting anything in return. Hours seemed to pass as he continued to play under the Pope's calm guidance. The room, once tense with embarrassment and uncertainty, became a sanctuary. Each note he played carried more honesty, more emotion, more of himself than he had ever allowed before. The Pope's presence was steady, unwavering, encouraging without interference. It was an experience that left him profoundly moved, aware that he was witnessing a different kind of greatness, one that did not rely on recognition or applause. At one point, Pope Leo XIV suggested a small change in the way he approached a passage, not to correct him, but to help him feel the music differently. "Try listening with your heart," the Pope said. "Let the notes guide your intention rather than your technique. Feel the music, do not control it." The pianist tried, letting go of his habitual need for precision and showmanship. The music shifted, becoming smoother, more expressive, more alive. Each note carried a sense of vulnerability and authenticity that had been missing in his performances for years. The realization was powerful. Art, he understood now, was not about perfection or display, but about honesty and connection. The Pope remained quietly attentive, smiling softly, occasionally nodding as the music flowed. His patience allowed the pianist to explore without fear, to experiment without judgment, and to experience a freedom he had not known since he first began playing. The lessons of humility, patience, and sincerity began to settle deeply within him, reshaping not only the way he approached music, but the way he saw himself. As the session continued, the pianist began to reflect on his life beyond music. He remembered the constant pursuit of recognition, the desire to outshine others, the endless comparisons that had dominated his thoughts for years. In this quiet room, under the calm guidance of Pope Leo XIV, those burdens began to feel lighter. He realized that he had been chasing the wrong measures of success, and that real fulfillment came from sharing, connecting, and learning. After a long period of playing, he finally stopped, resting his hands gently on the keys. The room was silent except for the soft echo of the last note. He looked at Pope Leo XIV, unsure if he could find words to express what he was feeling. But the Pope's calm smile said more than words ever could. It was a smile that communicated understanding, encouragement, and affirmation. "You have learned more in this hour than many do in years of performance," the Pope said softly. "True artistry comes from the heart, and true greatness comes from the way we treat others and the respect we show in all our actions." The pianist nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude, awe, and humility. He realized that this was a turning point, not just for his music, but for his life. The lessons of the evening would stay with him forever, guiding him in ways he had never imagined. As they left the private room and returned to the main hall, the pianist felt a renewed sense of purpose. He understood now that his talent was a gift, but the way he shared it honestly, humbly, and with intention was what would define his legacy. The evening had begun with pride, ego, and expectation, but it had transformed into something far more meaningful, a lesson in humility, a rediscovery of purpose. and a deep appreciation for the quiet strength of a kind, wise, and patient heart. And though the night was not yet over, the pianist knew that everything had changed. What had begun as an ordinary performance had become a profound lesson in life, a moment that would shape his understanding of music, character, and the true meaning of greatness for years to come. He realized that this experience was not just about notes on a piano, it was about growth, humility, and the courage to see the world differently. In that quiet Vatican room, something extraordinary had begun. The pianist had come expecting applause, but he had found something far greater: wisdom, reflection, and the chance to connect with a heart as calm and powerful as any symphony he had ever played. It was a moment he would carry forever, a turning point that promised to guide him not only as a musician, but as a human being. The Pope's Final. The following is a fully human-centric, simple, and engaging version of Part 5 as requested, in approximately 1,700 words, written in a continuous narrative style. The next morning, the pianist woke early with a restless feeling he could not quite shake. Sleep had not been deep. The events of the previous evening had filled his mind with questions he could not answer so easily. He had come to the Vatican expecting applause, admiration, and a chance to perform for one of the most influential audiences in the world. What he had received instead was a quiet, humbling lesson in humility. Pope Leo XIV had not scolded him, had not shown anger, had not demanded respect in the ways he had expected. Instead, the Pope had given him something far more valuable: a mirror to see himself, and a new understanding of what greatness truly meant. The pianist sat by his window, staring at the quiet courtyard of the Vatican. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off the ancient stone and polished marble. The courtyard was empty, peaceful, almost suspended in time. The pianist thought of the private room with the piano, the soft encouragement of the Pope, the way he had listened without judgment. Every memory felt vivid, and he realized he was not just remembering an evening, but reliving it. Every note he had played seemed to echo in his mind, carrying with it the lesson that had begun to reshape his heart. He felt a deep desire to play again, but this time it could not be for pride. He wanted to feel the music, to let it guide him, to connect in a way he had rarely allowed before. He dressed carefully and made his way to the small practice hall the Vatican had prepared. The grand piano stood there as if waiting for him, its polished surface reflecting the morning light. He sat down slowly, hands hovering over the keys. His fingers trembled slightly, not from nervousness about skill, but from the awareness of the responsibility he now felt toward the music itself. When he began to play, he started with the simple piece he had practiced the night before. At first, it was cautious, hesitant. His fingers remembered the motions, but his mind remembered the lessons. He did not play for applause. He did not play to impress. He played to express, to explore, to feel. And as the notes flowed, he noticed a subtle change within himself. The music no longer felt like a performance. It felt like a conversation, a connection with something larger than himself, something deeply human and quietly profound. Pope Leo XIV had requested to observe him, and he quietly entered the room, settling in a chair near the piano. There was no grand entrance, no ceremonial display. The Pope simply sat, calm, patient, and fully attentive. The pianist felt the same mix of nerves and respect he had felt before, yet this time it was different. It was no longer embarrassment. It was motivation. He wanted to honor this quiet confidence, this unwavering presence, not with showmanship, but with sincerity. He experimented with the music, adjusting tempos, emphasizing soft passages, lingering on notes that might otherwise pass quickly. For the first time, he allowed silence to have its own weight, letting pauses carry emotion as fully as the sound itself. Each measure became a story, each chord a reflection of thought, feeling, and intention. The room, filled only with the two of them, seemed to expand, absorbing the music and reflecting it back with clarity. Pope Leo XIV listened intently, occasionally nodding subtly. He did not offer direct instruction, but his presence was guiding the pianist more than words ever could. The pianist realized that he was no longer performing in the usual sense. He was participating in a shared experience, one that transcended skill, fame, or expectation. Every note he played was an offering, a message carried by sound and emotion, meant to touch the listener's heart rather than the world at large. After a few moments, the Pope spoke quietly. "Do you hear the music within yourself?" he asked. "It is not the speed of your fingers, nor the perfection of the notes that matters. It is what you put into it, what you allow it to reveal." The pianist paused and reflected. He realized he had been so focused on technique, on perfection, and on impressing others that he had never considered the deeper purpose of music. Now, guided by the quiet wisdom before him, he began to play differently. His hands moved more freely, less bound by expectation, more guided by feeling. The piano responded to him in new ways, echoing emotion instead of calculation. Minutes passed, then hours. Time seemed to stretch and contract in the quiet practice hall. The pianist lost track of the external world, the world of critics, cameras, and applause, and instead entered a place where the music itself became the world. And all the while, Pope Leo XIV watched, silently offering the kind of support that does not interfere, but allows growth to unfold naturally. Finally, the pianist stopped playing and let his hands rest on the keys. The silence of the room was profound, filled with the weight of everything that had been expressed. He turned slowly, unsure of what to expect from the Pope, but he saw only a calm, encouraging smile, a look that conveyed understanding, approval, and gentle affirmation. "You have done well," the Pope said softly. "You have played with honesty, and that is the greatest accomplishment any musician can achieve. You have learned to listen, not just to the notes, but to yourself, and that is the path toward true mastery." The pianist nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude he had never felt before. It was not gratitude for applause, recognition, or fame. It was gratitude for guidance, patience, and a quiet, transformative presence. He understood that he had begun a journey, one that would not end with this single performance, but would shape the way he lived, the way he played, and the way he connected with others. Pope Leo XIV gestured toward the piano again. "Would you like to try something new?" he asked. "I can show you a small piece, very simple, and you may attempt it if you wish. It is not a test, nor is it a performance. It is an opportunity to explore and learn." The pianist hesitated, then nodded. He realized that every moment with the Pope was teaching him something he had never experienced before. He approached the new piece cautiously, reading the notes slowly, letting the rhythm settle in his mind. The music was gentle, almost childlike in its simplicity, but it carried a depth of emotion he had not expected. He began to play, carefully at first. The sound was soft, but it grew in confidence as he let himself feel the music fully. Pope Leo XIV watched attentively, offering a gentle smile of encouragement with each measure. The pianist felt an unusual warmth, a quiet joy, as he realized that the purpose of this exercise was not to display skill, but to nurture growth, connection, and understanding. As he continued, he discovered nuances in the music he had never noticed before. A pause here carried longing, a slight emphasis there conveyed hope. The piano, guided by his hands and his attention, became a voice for emotions he had rarely allowed himself to feel. And the Pope, sitting calmly nearby, became a witness to a transformation that was occurring quietly, profoundly inside him. After some time, The pianist paused again and looked at the Pope. I think I understand," he said quietly. "Not just the music, but something about myself. I have been playing for others, for recognition, for applause, and I have never truly listened." The Pope nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. "That is a lesson many never learn. Music is more than performance. It is reflection, expression, and connection. The greatest art comes not from the desire to impress, but from the courage to be sincere, to reveal truth through creation." The pianist felt a lump in his throat. He realized that for the first time he had played not to be admired, but to be understood, to communicate, to share a piece of himself through sound. The experience was both humbling and liberating. He had discovered a depth to his own talent, a capacity for honesty and vulnerability that he had long ignored. Hours passed in quiet study and practice. The pianist experimented with variations, exploring the way emotion could change the meaning of a single note. The room became a sanctuary, free from distraction, ego, or expectation. Pope Leo XIV remained a patient guide, providing presence, encouragement, and subtle insight without ever imposing control. The pianist realized that this was not a lesson about music alone, but about life, humility, and understanding. Finally, the Pope spoke again. "You are ready," he said softly. "Not for performance, not for praise, but for sharing your music as it was meant to be shared. Let it speak from your heart, and everything else will follow." The pianist nodded, a sense of quiet resolve settling over him. He understood that this was the moment he had been preparing for, not to impress the world, but to express truth, sincerity, and connection. He felt a new sense of purpose, a clarity of vision he had never experienced before. And though the morning light streamed through the windows and the world outside awaited, the pianist knew that the lessons of the Vatican, the presence of Pope Leo XIV, and the experience of true humility would remain with him forever. They had not only transformed the way he played music, but the way he saw himself, his art, and the world around him. The path ahead was still unknown, but he felt ready to walk it with honesty, humility, and courage. And in that quiet room, with the piano beneath his hands and the Pope watching with steady patience, the pianist discovered something he had never realized he needed: the power of sincerity, the depth of humility, and the extraordinary strength of a gentle heart. This concludes Part 5, Captor. Here's Part 6 in approximately 1,700 words, written in a fully human-centric, natural, and engaging style as requested. The day of the public performance had arrived, and the Vatican was quietly buzzing with anticipation. Guests had gathered from across the world, all expecting an evening of music, culture, and tradition. Yet among them, few could guess the quiet transformation that had taken place in the pianist since the previous night. He had spent hours practicing privately, learning lessons in humility, patience, and sincerity. What had started as a desire for recognition had evolved into a deeper understanding. Music was not about applause, but about connection and truth. The pianist arrived early, entering the grand hall with a mix of nerves and determination. He had performed in many venues before, with thousands of eyes on him, but this moment felt different. He no longer sought to impress. He sought only to share, to express, and to communicate through his music. The weight of expectation still pressed on him, but it was tempered by the lessons he had learned from Pope Leo XIV. The calm, patient presence of the Pope, who would be sitting quietly in the audience, gave him a steadying confidence. Guests were taking their seats, murmuring politely to one another. The hall was magnificent, with tall ceilings, ornate carvings, and chandeliers that reflected light like floating stars. Yet, despite the grandeur, the pianist's focus remained on the simple truth he had learned. His music was a conversation, a story, a bridge between hearts. He adjusted the piano bench, placed his fingers gently on the keys, and took a deep breath. The first notes were quiet, hesitant, as he tested the air and the audience. But immediately he felt the connection. The music moved naturally, without force or pretense. It was not about speed, precision, or flair. It was about sincerity, the honesty of sound that carried emotion directly from the performer's heart. Slowly, the hall seemed to transform. Guests leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the unfolding melody. Faces softened, eyes glistened, and a quiet hush fell over the room. The pianist moved deeper into the performance, exploring variations of the piece he had practiced privately. Each note carried a story, some of reflection, some of longing, and some of quiet joy. The simplicity of the melodies allowed the emotion to shine through. For the first time, the pianist realized that technical perfection was not what held power over people. It was authenticity, honesty, and the courage to reveal oneself through the music. Pope Leo XIV sat in his usual quiet spot, listening without interruption, offering nothing but calm attention and encouragement. The pianist felt the steady presence of the Pope as a grounding force, a reminder of what he had learned. Greatness was not about drawing attention to oneself, but about inspiring and touching others through integrity and connection. The piano keys became a medium for lessons that words alone could never carry out. As the music swelled, the audience began to respond in subtle ways. A hand lightly tapped along to the rhythm. A faint sigh escaped from a listener moved by the notes. A child, seated near the front, leaned forward with rapt attention. The pianist noticed these small reactions and felt a quiet satisfaction, not from praise, but from understanding that his music had found a path to their hearts. Midway through the performance, he paused briefly to adjust his position. He remembered the words Pope Leo XIV had spoken. Listen with your heart. Let the notes guide your intention rather than your technique. He let those words sink in and continued, this time allowing silence between the notes to carry meaning. The pauses were as expressive as the sounds themselves, creating space for the audience to feel, reflect, and connect. A soft smile formed on the pianist's face as he realized how differently he was playing now. Every previous performance had been about control, about demonstrating skill, about meeting expectations. Tonight, however, he played freely, honestly, and openly. He had let go of the need for recognition, the need to be seen as extraordinary. In this freedom, he discovered a depth in his own ability he had never accessed before. The piece progressed, flowing naturally from soft, introspective passages to brighter, more uplifting moments. The pianist was fully present in every note, aware of the story each phrase told. He thought not of himself, but of the audience, of the emotions the music could stir, and of the lessons he had learned through his private sessions with the Pope. It was as though the room itself had become part of the music, the audience breathing with him, responding to the ebb and flow of emotion. As he played, he caught sight of several important figures in the audience: clergy, scholars, dignitaries, all leaning forward, clearly moved. He realized that his music was bridging divides, transcending status and title, speaking directly to the humanity in each person present. This was the lesson he had been learning in private. True artistry, true greatness, was measured by the hearts one touched, not the accolades one received. The piano's final notes came slowly, deliberately, fading into silence. The hall remained quiet for a heartbeat, as if everyone was suspended in the emotion of the moment. Then, without prompting, a gentle wave of applause began, soft at first, then growing as more listeners joined. The pianist did not rise immediately, for he had played not for this moment, not for recognition, but for connection. Yet the applause was not empty or shallow. It was heartfelt, a reflection of the sincerity he had put into every note. Pope Leo XIV rose from his seat, walking slowly to the pianist. There was no grandeur, no ceremony, only a calm, warm presence. He extended a hand, not in judgment, but in recognition of the transformation he had witnessed. The pianist rose, feeling a mixture of humility and quiet pride, not pride in performance, but pride in growth, in understanding, and in the courage to be honest in his art. The Pope spoke softly, addressing the audience, but also the pianist personally. "Tonight, we have witnessed more than music," he said. "We have seen honesty, courage, and sincerity expressed through sound. True greatness lies not in display, but in the ability to connect, to move hearts, and to inspire understanding." His words were met with a reverent silence and then renewed applause, more genuine and heartfelt than anything the pianist had experienced before. As the applause continued, the pianist realized that he had achieved something far more profound than fame or recognition. He had transformed his approach to his art. He had learned that skill alone was not enough. That technique without humility and sincerity was empty. And he had discovered that true connection with others, through music or otherwise, was the ultimate measure of accomplishment. After the audience settled, Pope Leo XIV invited the pianist to walk with him through the hall. They moved quietly, the air filled with a sense of calm triumph rather than celebration. Guests watched respectfully, sensing that something remarkable had taken place, something beyond ordinary performance or spectacle. The pianist felt the lesson solidifying within him. Greatness carried not by recognition, but by integrity, humility, and the willingness to be fully present as they walked. The Pope shared stories of other artists and musicians who had discovered the same truth, that their greatest impact came not from applause, but from sincere expression and connection. The pianist listened intently, realizing that his journey was part of a much larger story, a story of human growth, of learning to embrace humility, and of using one's talents to touch lives genuinely and deeply. By the end of the evening, the pianist felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. He had come expecting to impress, to perform, to be celebrated. Instead, he had been transformed, learning lessons in humility, empathy, and sincerity that would guide not only his music, but his life. The experience had reshaped him completely, revealing that true greatness is measured not by attention, but by the courage to be authentic, the patience to learn, and the generosity to connect with others. As he prepared to leave the Vatican that night, he paused one last time to look at the grand piano. He thought of the private lessons, the guidance of Pope Leo XIV, the quiet practice, and the heartfelt performance. He realized that every note played, every pause observed, every moment of sincerity had led him here, to a deeper understanding of music, art, and humanity. He had been given a gift far greater than applause, the gift of transformation. Pope Leo XIV placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "the lessons you have learned are not only for the piano. They are for every part of life. Humility, patience, sincerity, and presence will guide you further than talent or fame ever could." The pianist nodded, feeling the words settle within him. He knew that this was a turning point, a defining moment that would influence every choice he made in the years ahead. He would carry the lessons, the guidance, and the quiet strength of the Pope with him always. And as he stepped into the night, leaving the Vatican behind, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, to play, to create, and to live with honesty, humility, and the courage to touch hearts. The audience, too, would remember this night. They had not only witnessed music, they had witnessed transformation, and the story of the pianist who had arrived seeking applause, only to discover the power of sincerity and humility, would be shared quietly, reverently, as an example of what true greatness looks like. For the pianist, the journey was only beginning. Every performance from this point forward would carry the lessons learned.